What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tomatoito Boxing Show. And let's continue on breaking down the fights that took place this past weekend. An important weekend at that because the new inductees into the International Boxing Hall of Fame were in-house and in attendance for many of the events that were on hand around the New York area this past weekend. That ceremony took place, a festive weekend for people of Puerto Rico, where they hold their traditional annual Puerto Rican festival on Sundays and the parade on Sunday, and so it becomes a whole festive weekend starting from Thursday, I believe, is when all the celebrations get underway, and so Golden Boy ended up holding a card. We'll touch base on it here briefly, and then Top Rank had the main card on Saturday night, and that was headlined by none other than a kid who many are starting to put a lot of pressure on, and many are starting to clamor, much like they do with all new prospects, start to make comparisons as to prior or former legends from the same regions or the same countries. And in this scenario, it's Xander Zayas who's having a lot of pressure put on him, and comparisons, many feeling that he could be the next Felix Tito Trinidad coming out of the island of Puerto Rico. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a young 21-year-old fighter who is still coming into his own, who is still figuring out his place within the realm of boxing, is still coming into his own as a pro. Very developed boxing for a young 21-year-old fighter. A lot of experience under his belt as far as amateur experience goes, as far as boxing pedigree goes. He's a very well-rounded fighter that still needs further development and further work. But Xander Zayas keeps answering the call as the competition continues to get stiffer and stiffer for him. Good matchmaking, and they've been moving him up just right. So he was a headliner for this event. He faced veteran Patrick Teixeira, who's a 33-year-old Brazilian fighter, used to box for Golden Boy a while back, and now boxing for Top Rank. Xander Zayas ends up cruising to a victory, to say the least. Fairly one-sided, and much attributed to the output, the punch output, and the workout rate or the work rate of Xander Zayas. In the end, the judges had it 99-91, 100-90, and 100-90. All three judges, unanimous decision in this 10-round fight, awarding it to Xander Zayas. Now, Patrick Teixeira is one of those fighters that can pose problems to any fighter on any given night. He's that type of fighter where he can make the fight dirty. He can make not dirty, but make the fight ugly. And he has that type of style that can complicate the fight for his opponents. We've seen him step up, and he usually fights at the level of the opposition. There's fights that we see him and we start thinking that he's becoming a shot fighter, or that he's not getting any better, or that he maybe doesn't belong in the top ranks of the 154-pound division. And then we see him fight other fights, and we're impressed with his output, with his combinations, with his swarm and his attack. That's the case when he became the interim WBO champ at 154 pounds. And if you remember, he was moving up fairly well, started building a name for himself, and he got thrown in against Carlos Adames, who is now the WBC middleweight champ. But one of those losses that Carlos Adames, the blemish that Carlos Adames has in his career, came at the hands of Patrick Teixeira. And that's when they fought for the WBO interim 154-pound title. That was back in November of 2019. Patrick Teixeira complicated that fight for Carlos Adames. And Adames, who's going to be active coming up soon, he's still has that sole blemish to his record. He's a 23-1 fighter with 18 knockouts to his credit. He's climbed up the ranks of the middleweight division after leaving the 154. Janibek keeps calling him out. Adames was always trying to get into that fight with Jermall Charlo. Never happened. He now got elevated from interim to full status champion of the 160, and he will be fighting Tero Geisha in a week's time. He's going to be defending the WBC middleweight title. We're talking about Adames because that one blemish that he has on his record came at the hands of Patrick Teixeira back in 2019 when they fought for the interim version of the WBO title. Patrick Teixeira fought a near perfect or as perfect of a fight that he could have fought, that you could have asked him to put together against Carlos Adames, became the WBO interim champ. And when he unified against Brian Castaño, that is, he came up short. He was bested by Brian Castaño in the very next outing, and that was in February of 2021. He took a long layoff, all of 2020, came back February of 21, fought Brian Castaño, lost a unanimous decision against then undefeated Brian Castaño. We haven't seen or heard from Brian Castaño anymore since his defeat to Charlo in that big undisputed showdown. And that I think he's still active. I think I've seen videos of Brian Castaño still getting ready and announcing that he's going to be coming back soon, but no fight announcement yet. Patrick Teixeira moved on to lose, got DQ'd against Paul Cuesta in his next outing after the Castaño loss, and then suffered another unanimous decision in his very next outing against Magomed Kurbanov. That was in 2022. From there, he put together a couple victories there where he beat Adrian Perez, he beat Carlos Rivera, stopped both of those opponents. And now in the outing that we see him against Xander Zayas, it was a very hesitant, very slow, very lethargic Patrick Teixeira, who is coming off the loss of one of his parents. And so you could make the case that mentally he wasn't in the fight, maybe even physically, but he looked like a 40-year-old fighter in the body of a 33-year-old. He was slow, he was lethargic. He's a durable fighter with a good chin who takes punches very, very well and gives the damage right back. He was a little too slow for the young Xander Zayas, who manages to put his combinations together very well, who manages to press forward, and who manages to dictate the pace and the rhythm with his young legs and his young output. This was the case Saturday night. Xander Zayas basically cruised to a victory, but he did walk away with some criticisms. Critiques from commentators, critiques from former fighters like Gabe Rosado, saying that he needs to get more creative. Criticism such as he doesn't possess the killer instinct. He had a hurt fighter, a deteriorated fighter in front of him, and he couldn't stop him. And such criticisms that are valid. And when you look at the grand scope of things, this is still a young 21-year-old fighter who is still developing and still looking good each and every time out that he steps into the ring. He is nowhere near his ceiling. You gotta keep that in perspective. When these comments fly out, they're like, he doesn't belong in the top of the 154. There's no way he's going to compete. Spence would kill him. Fondora would slaughter him. Sue would have his way. Yes, I get it. I can agree. But we don't know for sure how the outcome of those fights would turn out. You could assume, but you don't know. And the benefit of the doubt lies heavily favoring Xander Zayas because he's still young and he's still developing. And each time out that we see him, he shows us something a little bit different, some type of new addition or new improvement to his game. He has very good workflow, very good work rate, good output, good pressure, good footwork, fast hands, good power. He cut up and busted up Patrick Teixeira, who's been in there with many top names in the 154-pound division, who has a resume that doubles that of Xander Zayas. He got the 5th loss of his career, Patrick Teixeira, 34 wins, 5 losses. Xander Zayas improves to 19-0. Yes, he wasn't able to stop Xander Zayas, but he got very good rounds under his belt, good experience, much needed experience against top opposition. And this is a big step up from his prior fights. People are asking for him to get tougher opposition. Patrick Teixeira, definitely one of the tougher opponents to date. He beat Jorge Fortea in December, who was a 24-3-1 fighter going into that fight. Robert Valenzuela Jr., who was a 25-4 fighter. Ronald Cruz was a popular fighter that he defeated, 18-2. But that's it. That's been the level of opposition. So Patrick Teixeira, who had a version of the WBO title, has been in the ring with Carlos Adames, with Brian Castaño, with Kurbanov, has experience against top-level opposition, or better, higher-level opposition than that of Xander Zayas. For Zayas to be able to rout Teixeira in a unanimous decision way, such as he did, says a lot about the young man and where he's at currently in his development. Is he going to be the next Trinidad? Is he going to be the next Cotto? Don't put pressure on him like that. It's unfair. But that's clickbait. That's how you grab headlines. That's how you also generate dialogue and create new narratives. But I feel like it's a lot of pressure for this young man who's barely coming into his own. Give him a couple more fights and a couple more years and start improving in the level of opposition, or continuing in this trajectory as such as his recent opponent in Patrick Teixeira. He continues to fight fighters like this, and then yes, we could start making that argument, and we could start getting a little more serious about those conversations as to if he will top former legendary fighters coming out of the island of Puerto Rico. For now, congratulations to Xander Zayas, because he continues his winning ways and continues to look better and improve each time out. Also on the card, one of the fighters, two-time undisputed champ Naoya Inoue, made the trip to New York, enjoyed some baseball games during the week, enjoyed the celebratory weekend and the festive weekend that was, and attended the top-ranked card. And many were speculating that he was there to scout Shushu Carrington, who was in action as a co-main event against Brian DeGracia. Brian DeGracia stepped in as a last-minute stand-in. Very durable fighter with good chin, a road warrior, if you may, a 29-3 with 1 draw to his record, and a fighter that had never been stopped in his career. Bruce Carrington fighting a 10-round featherweight fight, lining himself up to face the top opposition in the featherweight division that's stacked. We just saw Nick Ball lift the title from Ray Ford in that 5v5 a couple weeks back. We got Venado Lopez. You have Figueroa lining up to face Ray Vargas. You have Divino Espinosa, who's going to be fighting Chirino Lopez pretty soon. It's a stacked card. And Angelo Leo competing in that division. We got, who else? Cool Boy Steph moving up to 126. So for Naoya Inoue to make the trip to New York for the Hall of Fame festive weekend, but mostly the speculation is that he was scouting his potential future opponent should he try his hand at featherweight and move up from 122 and try to conquer the 126-pound division. Very interesting. And that garnered a lot of attention. Shushu Carrington stops Brian DeGracia, an opponent who had never been stopped in his career, gets the first stoppage of his career, the fourth loss overall of his resume, and Carrington improves to 12-0. He's looking good. He's a very explosive fighter who could have taken DeGracia out earlier in the fight, but took his foot off the gas several times, and DeGracia, a durable fighter with a good chin, managed to last as long as he did. 8 rounds of the 10 until the final stoppage came. So that was the intrigue. A lot of noise around the top rank card, a lot of movement. You saw Brian Norman, who was on hand after his victory over Giovanni Santillan a few weeks back, the one that I happened to be live at, out in San Diego, and he's the new interim champ for the welterweight division, interim WBO champ for the welterweight division, awaiting to see what Terence Crawford is going to do if he's going to vacate, just like Mario Barrios. Is he going to be elevated to full status if Terence Crawford wins a title 154 and decides to campaign at 154 from now on? So that was very, very, very interesting. And then we got Friday, the lead up, and what kicked off the events in New York over at the Turning Stone Casino was Golden Boy's card, which was headlined by none other than Oscar Collazo, who came away with a unanimous decision win over Gerardo Zapata, but it was a fight that was as highly contested as you could have imagined. Many feel that this should have been a split decision rather than a unanimous decision. He had his work cut out for him, and he nearly got stopped. The Nicaraguan fighter Zapata gave him headaches, but it was just too little and too far in between. He would have spurts, and when he would have those spurts, he would find success against Collazo, nearly dropping him. In the end, Oscar Collazo wins the decision 117-110 and 119-109. 2 cards, Glenn Feldman, Don Trella. Don Ackerman gave him a 117-110. Everybody gave it a very one-sided fight, but if you witnessed the fight, you wouldn't agree with these scores. If you were just watching the fight on mute without commentary, you would think that the fight was a little bit closer because there was some damaging work that the Nicaraguan fighter put together, some good combinations, and some hard punches that he managed to land on Collazo. Nonetheless, the scorecards read one way. Now, I'm not saying that Collazo lost. He won this fight, deservingly so, and he now improves to 10-0 and retains his WBO world minimum weight title. This is a fighter that I got to witness on hand at the beginning of this year, at the opening of this year, as he fought in the co-main event of Jaime Munguia and John Ryder out in the Phoenix area. And I happened to be there live and called the fight live. And you could check that out on the podcast as well. Those of you that follow, you heard that episode. And that was a fun one to call out. That was fun. It was a fun fight. He improved to 10-0 and looking to unify the division. Oscar Collazo impresses. And again, another Puerto Rican fighter that represented his people, his island, very, very well to kick off the weekend. And then, of course, the following night, Xander Zayas in the main event of the top rank card. On the undercard of the Golden Boy fight, a little bit less stacked with a lot of up-and-coming fighters. But you had a talent that a lot of people are keeping an eye on, and that's welterweight Eric Tudor, who got his 11th win, stopped Rodriguez Livesay by knockout, hands him the third loss of his record, and Tudor improves to 11-1, gets the 7th knockout of his career, And he's looking good. He's looking very interesting. Very interesting fighter. Very interesting new prospect to keep an eye out on to see how he's going to continue to develop as opposition continues to get stiffer for him. Good matchmaking to date. He has some very good wins. But he does have a loss in his young career against Jose Luis Sanchez. That took place this past year in October of 23. And that's a fight that, although he lost a unanimous decision, it was a fight that his style, it was all about styles in that fight. And Jose Luis Sanchez was your traditional grind out type Mexican fighter that just posed every type of bad luck and problems for Eric Tudor's more elusive style of boxing. He's in your face and grinded out the fight and made it a ugly fight for Tudor to be able to finesse around. And he lost. He got bested. He couldn't figure out the angles, kept getting caught with overhands and hooks, and ends up dropping the decision to Jose Luis Sanchez. He since bounced back, beat Luis Caraballo Ramos in February of this year, and now the second victory in a row against Rodriguez Livsey as a co-main event of the Collazo headline for Golden Boy. So that was a very interesting, softer card than that of Top Rank, but a very interesting one because it was a catalyst for the weekend. And the main attraction was, of course, Oscar Collazo, and we wanted to see how he was going to look and if he's going to continue his ascension in the minimum weight division, trying to unify. Collazo ideally could fight Filipino Melvin Jerusalem, Thai fighter who's a WBA champ, Tamanun Ninyamtrung, whom we spoke about when we were covering his fight in January. Fellow countryman Wilfredo Mendez, who holds a version of the WBA, the gold version, to Ninyamtrung's full. And Genjiro Shigeoka, which seems to be the most attractive and possibly the most realistic next opponent for Collazo. That seems to be the most appealing and the easier fight of the others that I mentioned to make for Collazo. And Shigeoka Collazo would be an amazing fight. And that would be all firepower for as long as it lasts. So very interesting weekend. That puts a wrap to our weekend. Naoya Inoue, the two-time undisputed, heavy-handed, dynamite-handed powerhouse that he is, made his way to New York, enjoyed baseball, enjoyed the festivities, enjoyed his weekend, and partook in the Hall of Fame inductees in the whole weekend that was, and made news scouting Shushu Carrington. So that was very, very interesting. Xander Zayas continues his ways. Don't pay attention to the critique so much. Look at the grand scope of things. He's 21 and coming into his own. And Oscar Collazo looking to unify the minimum weight division. Two different promotions. Don King was also in action on Friday. Blair Cobbs defeating Adrian Broner, who is at a crossroads and has since announced that he is not retiring, that he's not hanging him up. He's going to continue his career. Blair Cobbs improved, got another win. Sole loss of his career at the hands of Alexis Rocha. I'm sure he's going to try to run that back. Impressive for him because he continues his ascension, a similar age as that of Adrian Broner, but two fighters that, although the same age, completely different states of, or in completely different stages in their respective careers. So, pretty cool weekend overall. Busy weekend, and now we have in a few days' time. In a few days' time, you're going to have Tank Davis against Frank Martin. And that's going to be something to to witness. I'm looking right now, if you hear me a little spaced out, it's because I'm looking at the list, trying to bring it up for you. As to the many fighters, I mentioned it on the last episode with Cobbs and Adrian Broner. Full episode on that one. If you didn't check it out, go check it out. And so I mentioned some of the stars that were on hand for the Golden Boy card. And obviously the Cobbs Adrian Broner card took place in Florida, so completely out of the loop. But as far as New York, Golden Boy represented on Friday, being the catalyst for the boxing weekend, and then Xander Zayas and Top Rank ended up putting the cherry on top with their event on Saturday. And then, of course, the Puerto Rican parade on Sunday, the Hall of Fame inductions of Ricky Hatton, Michael Moore, Ivan Calderon, Diego Corrales, Janie Couch, and Ana Maria Torres, who were all inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. So you saw Marco Antonio Barrera also partaking in the events that weekend, and he's formed a very good friendship with Ricky Hatton, and so he was there to support his friend. And Michael Moore, you saw Evander Holyfield, you name it. There was tons of people that were on hand, and you had Teofimo Lopez on hand as well out there in New York, and Vito Melniki, who ended up getting signed to Top Rank now, aside from Naoya Inoue showing up to those that I continue mentioning. And so yeah, and you had Brian Norman Jr., newly crowned champ. You name it. The stars were out for this weekend. It's such a big weekend out in New York. And congrats to Ricky Hatton, Michael Moore, Diego Corrales, Ivan Calderon, the more notorious of the inductees for this 2024 class. And well, we'll move on. So keep your eyes, ears open for the next episode, as we will be covering and doing a preview of the big weekend that's going to be headlined by none other than Tank versus Frank, and the co-main of David Benavides trying his hand at 175 pounds against former WBC champ Govstik. So that's going to be an interesting card. And of course, a full slew of the supporting cast, where we're going to see, we just talked about it briefly earlier, Carlos Adames putting his WBC title on the line against Taro Geisha. And so we'll talk about all that in the next episode. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. Have a great night, and we'll continue pushing forward. Take care.